first speaker is Elisha Anchovich. Rabbi Dr. Elisha Anchovich he teaches biblical through second temple to contemporary Halakha and practical wisdom in the Modest Institute of Jewish Studies, the Yeshivat Ma'ale Gilboa and Midreshet Ein HaNitziv. He is associated as a researcher with the Emory University Center for Law and Religion and Hebrew University Department of Jewish Thought. His paper will be on the topic Archeology, Anthropology, and Google Technology. Matchmakers for critical biblical studies and traditional Halakha.
Thank you, Alyosha.
20 minutes.
Okay, please pass these out. Okay. Can you close the door? In contrast to Sergei, I'm a pragmatist. I don't deal with European philosophy other than read it and criticize it as a pragmatist. So we're going to do a pragmatist lesson here. What I suggest that one of the topics raised in this conference was, what are the challenges of technology, archaeology, anthropology, everything was thrown into the pile.
G. Anthropology.
Oh, G. All the G's. Were thrown into the pile. And what I'd like to suggest is, frankly, the reason they're perceived as challenges is because we've been in a bad place in terms of our academic research. Human knowledge, as opposed to the progressive approach, which Tzvi definitely favors in general, personality-wise, human knowledge has actually dropped, beginning with modernity. Beginning with modernity, what happens is we have texts, we have knowledge, we decide to classify it, we decide to organize it, we decide to understand it, and by placing it into frameworks that can allow us to then manipulate it. That means we begin to understand less. What happens when we live in a world in which we don't try to master the world is we actually encounter people that are different than ourselves. We actually encounter fables about worlds that are away from us, but have things going on there. They may be false, such as dragons. They may be half-truths, such as dinosaur bones that indicate dragons. They may be completely false, as in trees that grow animals. But we hear stories about everything. We come to modernity, we stop listening to stories, we stop listening to people, we stop understanding what people are doing. Since we stop understanding what people are doing, we need to fit everything into our categories. When they don't fit into our categories, we are bound to dismiss, describe, or obey. And that's where theology comes in. Theology became an important factor in modernity because modernity started telling us that God didn't give the Torah. Okay, in a moment we'll come back to that. Modernity also told us that laws are merely, well, laws, capricious, not meaningful, based on outdated beliefs. That being the case, we come back again to the question, so then why do we have these laws, why do we obey these laws? And in Judaism, that's come up as a question of theology. So, what I want to suggest here is, let's reframe the question. We have now reached the point in time where we know so much. There is no way anybody in this room can now say that culture does this because they believe that, because they have that metaphysical conception. Not true. My own culture, with people sharing the same beliefs as I do, has people doing the same thing that that culture does. I just go into Google, and I found every single chat group in the world about anything. Whatever you want to find. But if you think nobody does that, that's just too weird. Go find it. I teach Halakha, again, over the 4 sections of Halakha, and over time, Tanakh through the 20th century, and critically through periods, and there is not a thing I don't need to find. I need to find everything, and guess what? It's all there. Which now means we can no longer deny that people do everything that people do. and it's not based on a metaphysical conception or a belief system. That being the case, if everything that people do, they do because they do as human beings, that means every norm system is actually understandable in any belief frame. Meaning I can speak about God granting or creating a law. I can speak about belief in demons. I can speak about belief in germs. I will end up with the same behavioral systems. Now, to illustrate the relevance of that. One, I'd like to go through how theology now gets switched from a belief that justifies what I do to belief that expresses what I do, or what I experience in the world. Two, to reading norms, which are the biggest challenge, as simply common sense, and showing why we tend to not read Halakha as common sense. First step, theology, just a pasuk. Tehillim, you have it in front of you. I'm not translating. Hashem Davesh, Hashem Ozit Azar. I believe this is a parak that people are familiar with. This is somebody describing just the amazingness of the world. This person faces no challenge of theology other than seas drown people, but not just majestic. Seas are horrible places, rivers can be horrible places, and then you might turn to polytheism or secularism. But it'll be out of an emotional place, not out of a need to have a theology of God that allows you to say these psukim. I'll repeat myself again. Generally, we assume you need to have a theology that allows you to say these psukim. Our argument is it's the opposite. You sit there opposite the ocean, you sit there opposite the rivers, and you experience that there is God in the world. You might not. You might have somebody drown in the sea, and in which case, you may have a different experience of the world, called polytheistic. And Hades, or not Hades, I guess it's the sea. But Neptune will turn out to be evil, and so forth. Possible. But it won't be theology that frames the experience, it'll be experience that frames the use of theology. If that's the case, that frankly theology is merely the language we use to express what we feel in the world anyway, then as long as our norms make sense and are beautiful to us, and our lives are beautiful to us, we will experience the norms as coming from God. So why don't we? Or at least some of us don't. So there are three reasons. A, B, and C. A are laws in front of you. We have laws that deal with Tumat Met. Tumat Met, to go back to Google now, is one of those things where people look and they say, well, those are laws that a different society used to observe. Those are laws that are based on some type of belief about death, impurity, power of death spreading around like the 10 plagues, when the cloud spreads all around, the Makat, right? Makat Before. It's an old movie. Okay. When the cloud spreads, death spreads. It's a belief system that leads to these laws. So we're going to see very quickly that's not the case. We have in front of you two background sources. One is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who says very simply that the graves are caves. The caves of Gentiles, grave caves of Gentiles, do not impurify. Why? Because they are not called people. The Jews are called people. We can describe it as having a belief system about Gentiles differing from Jews, all possible. Or we can simply describe human experience. According to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, if I encounter a Gentile body, dead human, I become impure. However, if I touch a mound or a cave of my enemy, the one I see is other, not human, I do not become impure. That's an experience that people have every time they watch a movie where the bad guys, Independence Day, since it's come out again. Independence Day, nobody has sympathy for the aliens that die. Nobody has sympathy for the aliens because they're bad guys, and they look a little different, and so on and so forth. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is simply describing human experience. One can disagree with him and say, I know that people are buried there, therefore I'm sensitive to death, and that's a telling position that disagrees with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But there is nothing about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai that is not understandable on a simple experiential level. Second example is Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, who, in this debate between Pushim and Tzedukim about whether the books of Homer should impurify or not, points out that in purification depends on affection. The greater connection we feel to the dead, the more we're impure when we encounter the dead. If I encounter the dead bones of a donkey, clean bones, not rotting flesh, because that's going to be disgusting and tamei in a different way. But if I just encounter the dead bones of a donkey, I'm not affected by it, and I don't become impure. With that background, we understand that all these laws that seem strange begin to make sense, such as I am dwelling upstairs, and a person who dwells downstairs has died. I only become impure if the hole between our houses is a tefach and a tefach. If it's less than a tefach and a tefach, I do not become impure. The Mishnah gives two reasons. One is because, korot yordot pesotmot. Kilu korot yordot pesotmot, which, as you've heard me say before, kilu korot yordot pesotmot is often misunderstood to mean that there is a power beam. Star Trek, what's it called?
Tractor.
The what? Right, okay, that goes down and somehow closes that space. Incorrect. Rather, what it means is, when you stand above, and here's where archaeology comes in, when you stand above a floor that is very thick between apartments, because it has stones, and then dirt, and then wood, when you stand on that, and there is a hole that is merely a tefach large below you, you will not see the people downstairs. You will not see them because everything converges on the horizon when you look at a distance. And therefore, kirot yordot vesotmot. A very simple law, once you read it correctly, as an experience. Or, as the second line says, there is no connection between two dirot when there isn't an opening of a tefach, i.e., neighbors don't share things if you can't put your hand in and out. A hand is a tefach. A tefach al tefach is the minimum required to open your hand and actually share objects like pass of sugar between apartments. If you do not pass sugar between the apartments, you are actually not connected people, and therefore the death in the other apartment is unfortunate, but it's not going to purify. The next example that gets misread also in that way, or exemplifies this, whichever way you look at it, is the size of a coffin. If somebody is shipped in a coffin that is larger than the human body, then anybody coming in contact with that box does not become impure. However, should that box be the size of a human body, like those coffins, at least in the Western cartoons and movies, like it was always the size of the body, that they measure the person before they hang him to build an exact coffin. I don't know if that's really historically accurate, but if the box comes out to be exactly that person's size, with no shulayim, or not arba'im sa'a, i.e. not larger than the person, then one becomes impure, because at that point one looks at the box and one sees a human being. We will skip just because I'm worried about time. So we will skip about broken and open caves, sealed and open caves and closed caves. But we will go to 5 just a moment, or 4. First, based on everything we're saying about experience, the whole phenomenon through generations of Kohanim going to Kivrei Tzadikim and not worrying about becoming impure makes complete sense. Because when I go to the kever of a tzaddik, I do not encounter death, I encounter life. I'm going to Rabbi Nachman, let us say, to encounter Rabbi Nachman, not to encounter his bones. And the last is, just to wrap this up, that clearly this is not based on some type of special conception. Paraduma is long gone. Bathing the body fully is long gone in medieval Europe. It's cold in the winter. And yet, in spite of all these practices being done, even mikvah, by the way, for Nida is actually not a practice that's that common. Oh, no, it's not common. How much women are actually going to the mikvah in the middle of the winter? But in spite of the loss of praduma, in spite of moving away from the formal basis of this category, we come to medieval Ashkenaz, and people are still washing their hands. You have it in front of you, Tashbetz Katan, the student of the Maram Rutenberg, and the Mordechai. This is also his own words, i.e. a student of the Maram Rutenberg, not his citation of earlier sources. They both say that one washes their hands either when leaving a cemetery or when leaving the house of a mourner. So in spite of the fact that this doesn't match any of the precise rules, because one, we need a praduma, or one would need to bathe one's body fully, they're still washing their hands because that is the experience of doing something that washes away the experience one had to move on to the rest of life. That's one area. One area the one reason that we misread Halakha, we get struggle with theology, is because we read Halakha as based on metaphysical conception. We say we don't share it, so if we don't share it, and then we end up in a quandary. As opposed to realizing we're human beings and we share these norms and we do these all the time. Next, laws that are misread as fixed. How much time left? Okay, laws that are misread as fixed. I brought a classic example, seems to be a classic example, and that is mamzer. And mamzer seems to have a definition. And then when people talk about halakha and mamzerut and they want to take a liberal approach, they'll say it's not fixed, it progresses because we have liberal values. Neither one nor the other. Rather, taking this approach of common sense, and the source in front of you, we have mamzer, both sources that push mamzerut and limit it, and we have sources that expand mamzerut, actually. So in front of you, sources that say, I skipped to 2. We have sources in front discuss that that a married woman who was caught having an affair, in spite of being caught having an affair and having a child after being caught, the child's not considered a mamzer, even though one could say, hey, maybe mamzer is bad enough to avoid marrying, but the child's not considered a mamzer. Rather, the child's considered kosher unless she's putzah b'yoter and then take her. On the other hand, we have sources that expand this idea of mamzer, called it shtuki, and apply it to a single woman. So we go limiting and expanding. So what are we doing? So let's go back to experience now, just human experience. I'm going to say something not politically correct, but if you know somebody whose behavior is way, way off, whatever that means in your culture, do you want to necessarily marry that person's children? My assumption is that people will advise their sons and daughters not to marry the sons and daughters if somebody's behavior is way off. That being the case, these positions now begin making sense. A married woman that had an affair, that may not be the issue. She had an affair, these things happen. That won't make the child a mamzer. On the other hand, a single woman who can't identify the father, well, that gets a little awkward. How did that happen? What kind of behavior was that? And then there are those who discuss that that's only problematic if not the men came to her, but she went out to the men. Meaning, not that men managed to seduce her all the time, but she actually went out. They're describing more or less problematic behavior on the part of the woman. Okay, you have the source in front of you, kavua, not kavua, if everybody knows the makron to which I am referring. And just the way an example that plays that out is the medieval debate about a woman who is clearly not pregnant from her husband because her husband went abroad and didn't come back for 3 years. Is a child a mamzer? And there's a medieval debate about that. In places with more Jewish merchants, the child is not a mamzer. According to the Tosfos tradition, the child is not a mamzer. We say that the husband intended to have sex with her, and she was really thinking about her husband. And we say that in rabbinic language is Shema ba yedei shimush b'Shem. Right? Okay, he came using God's name. Nobody believes in flying carpets. What we mean is that he's thinking about her, she's thinking about him, she slept with another man instead. These things happen, but she's thinking about him and he's thinking about her, and then we can have those debates. When do we rely on it, when do we not? Does the husband have to come back and say, yes, I recognize this child as my child, or is it okay if he doesn't come back, as long as he doesn't come back and say, don't recognize the child as my child? Fine, we can have these social debates, but we're actually describing the behavior of a woman which scares us enough to say, well, don't marry your children. So what we've done is a metaphysical concept, a concept that seems to be fixed, called mamzerut. We see it's way all over the place. It's not about liberally pushing it or conservatively pushing it. It's about constantly judging who one wants to marry or not. And the last one is laws. The last reason we have problems with laws is because we misread justifications. So in front of you is a law with its justification. Christians should not do this. This is clearly, obviously, something one should not do on Shabbat because it is disgusting. No, it is disgusting. We turn to Rabbi Abba B'Shem Rabbi Chia Barashi, and Rabbi Chia says, "Rakak v'fichato haruach chayav mishum zoreh." And then we look at people studying this, and I've already taught, and classically people in Jewish law, Mishpat will tell you that the rabbis took this concept called Zorev, Shabbat, Melacha, and applied this to that category. As opposed to, the reason you're a chayav if you split in the wind is because it's disgusting. And you know how you describe spitting in the wind that's disgusting? What are you doing winnowing all over the place, as you see in the euphemism right below, but we could have given other non-rabbinic sources. In other words, you're chayav because you're doing something disgusting. And Shabbat is a day not to do something disgusting. Therefore, a man should not urinate from Rishut Rabim into private property because he's trying not to be caught urinating in public. Or he's at a party in somebody's house and he shouldn't urinate into the street. Or he shouldn't spit into the wind. And if he does, he's chayav for Zoreh. Of course it's chayav for Zoreh. The euphemism for spitting in the wind is winnowing. And therefore one's chayav. The argument is, the reasons we struggle with theology is because we actually don't treat our norms as norms that simply make sense. And if the norms make sense, then we don't struggle with theology. Why don't they make sense to us? Because we think they're based on metaphysical assumptions. They're not. Metaphysical assumptions express experience. We think that they're based on, in some fixed way, and we have to struggle and overcome them. No, they're not. They're human judgments about who to marry, not marry, let's say. And last, we mistreat the justifications of the law as something that, again, creates a fixed static law that needs to be overcome, as opposed to justifications, just common sense justifications. Thank you.
I totally didn't agree with some of your classifications in the following sense. I thought that you were taking very minority views in the rabbinic tradition. And of course, like any legal tradition, we all have our weirdos. American law has its weirdos, Jewish law has its weirdos, lots of legal systems have weirdos, and the purpose of consensus and authority is to a great extent to winnow out the weirdos.
So I'm not sure what you're referring to.
So I'll take, for example, on your page 2, the Cheles Tuvah Rashbash Simon Sadi Bey, about a woman whose husband goes far away and she conceives a child. What's the halakha here?
The Rashbas is stricter, but the classic position in Bali Tosfot was the child's not a mamzer. That was the position of the Smag.
Only when the husband acknowledges paternity.
That there's a debate whether he has to acknowledge, as long as he doesn't return and deny.
So, but in both of these cases, the Bali Tosfot says as follows: the husband comes back and says either silently or explicitly, "Yes, I was intimate." So since he acknowledged he was intimate and she acknowledges he was intimate, then the legal system doesn't intervene and put forward another answer. But nobody takes the view seriously that she can make this claim against the husband's claim that I'm not the father.
Correct.
So to me, it seems to me that many legal systems would adopt this view. It has nothing to do with theology. It has to do with pure emanut.
No, the husband's not believed. The husband never came back.
So says you.
No, so they said, but it's also, they say the way he came back is using Shem Hashem.
I'm
nobody comes back
not
using Shem Hashem.
interested in knowing how.
No,
If the woman were in prison and could not have been intimate with anybody,
yeah.
not the husband was far away, but simply the woman was confined, there's no view which says the child is not a mamzer. It has to do with the fact that the husband acknowledges he was intimate and he's believed.
So then I disagree with you. Because they specifically
now I
say
understand
that the husband came with Shem Hashem, and that's not possible.
Okay, I understand. To me, it seems clear that the consensus overwhelmingly rejects the metaphysical Bali Tosfot, and everybody understands it in a physical way, rather than in a metaphysical.
That's a modern phenomenon, and that's what I'm attacking here.
Okay, I got it.
Conclude with disagreement.
We're clear on why.
Right, we're clear why we disagree. Right.
It's clear that from the pure factual point of view, given the fact that we're capable of DNA testing and things of this sort, the halakha, to avoid status markers of mamzerut, which has a lot of negative repercussions within the halachic system, is matir mamzerim all the time. So, since you're discussion is on the line of pragmatics, then how is this a misreading?
Halakha, first of all, again, halakhic sources do not only permit mamzerim, they actually expand and create mamzerim. Whereas you take a single woman, and we call the child a mamzer, or at least they suffer on the shtuki, we call the child a shtuki, even though we don't have to, based on our definition of mamzer. We do it anyway. So it's not merely that we have some move of pushing the law in a certain direction. Rather, we are pragmatically analyzing who we want to marry to a mother. Otherwise, we could say, I guess what you said. If we were only pushing one direction, I would not have brought this example, because it wouldn't prove anything. Right? It could be interpreted your way, it could be interpreted my way. But given that we push in both directions, that means we're evaluating.
But the Halakha did the same to the Sufi, because if you shlach lechaim, you would not be considered as a Sufi. So a Sufi becomes also something very theoretical, because I don't think that anyone today can be declared mamzer on the basis of being a Sufi. As you see, shlach lechaim, all those definitions say we have kind of, maybe theoretical view about the Sufi, but in practice it will not.
Which makes complete sense that a Sufi, except for extreme scenarios, is not going to be a Sufi. But that would fit this model perfectly, because the child is found, adopted, and raised, and the child has a slight trauma of not knowing who the parents are. But that's not the same thing as being raised by a problematic parent. And therefore, of course.
Two small points. When Rabbi Broyd, when you said that the legal system tries to winnow out the weirdos, I just was wondering whether you meant winnow in the term the way Elisha used it, when you're talking about urinating or not, whether the legal system tries to urinate weirdos, I don't know. Definitional term. Elisha, I think that while I hear what you've tried to present to us, I sense it's a little bit pretentious to deny the possibility of the metaphysical. What I'm suggesting is that just because you and I perhaps don't experience the metaphysical, there are other people who claim that they do experience the metaphysical. And therefore to say that the entire legal system is all based on social constructs rather than something that really is metaphysical, and to deny that possibility entirely, I think that's perhaps a step that is, as I said, slightly pretentious.
Okay, so I don't know what social constructs mean in this setting, okay? And I don't know what it means to deny metaphysical. I'm claiming that this is based on experience. If I experience death, then it is metaphysically real, or it is not metaphysically real, depending on which intellectual head I'm using. But in experience, it's real. Death spreads. Death exists. That's an experience. That's metaphysically real. Or if I want to say the metaphysical of God, the more I experience Torah as humanly real, any one of us, the more we actually experience God as we learn it and practice it. Just the more I eat, I understand, the more I eat a chicken soup that reminds me of my grandmother and it tastes good, right? The more I'll be in the presence of my grandmother, her neshama will be present. Now, that's all real. I don't know what that means, it's metaphysically real or not. You want to get to a philosophical, medieval, not what you do, but medieval.
This is exactly the idea of David Hume. There is no concept without Roshan.
Fine, so there's a Roshan. Once I was saying there's a Roshan, everything else is already, I'm not arguing about it. No. So that I'm saying that I don't need to go. I don't need to go there. I don't need to get into that debate.
A few things. First of all, this idea of experience, you're presenting as if experience is somehow so unmediated that from experience can spring out law and custom and ritual, whereas all my experience is mediated by the pre-existence of law and custom and ritual and norms.
Right.
So you have this, I guess, the chicken and egg problem here.
Okay. So,
that's one, and then the other thing is, it seems like you're saying that all of halachic formalism is a kind of artifice that, and but if that's the case, then studying, Talmud at least, becomes this kind of weird reconstruction of people's experiences through their artifice, their projections, which seems to me to be not taking them seriously as their own experience of this not being artifice.
Okay, so I answered your question in order. The first one again was the one
Unmediated experience.
Okay, my claim is, and that's why I mentioned Google in the beginning. My claim is that every culture is actually dealing with their individual experiences.
With what?
Humans have the same range of experiences in every single culture.
I mean, I don't experience death the way someone else I don't see it as spreading. I don't think there's a miasma that spreads to me from the dead body. So I
don't
can
say miasma, but you are negatively affected by being in the room. As I do, here's my thought experiment I do with people. There was a box of open cookies next to a dead person. Your favorite cookies. Are you going to eat?
Yes.
Okay, and or somebody says yes, and most people say no.
But how can you say that these things are universal? You're just making it up.
No, because most people say no.
How do you know that? You surveyed the people in China?
Well, when I was in China, I asked people the same question.
Okay, and the people in Polynesia?
No, I did not
And
say
the American Indians?
everywhere in the world, but guess what I found everywhere in the world where I can check? Everything that's been written about every culture, at least as much as I can read, and I read a lot, describe the same phenomena. In every culture, there's tumat met. People avoid that which is worn by the dead. They don't want to at least wash it first. They don't want to eat that which has been on the dead person. People, these are human phenomena and human reactions.
I think that you'd have to provide much more empirical evidence.
So then I have them.
Great.
I have them.
That's
Big deal.
easy.
That's
That's
not
Dr.
hard.
Google.
That's what I've been doing my whole lifetime, which is looking at people, reading, and just looking at people and reading. That's my own circular thing.
I think, I'm sorry, because, yes, we can continue.